This is the Hydra in Kirby Air Ride. Awesome. And this is the Hydra getting absolutely bodied. What's happening here? Seems like the Hydra is about to be destroyed in a tournament game of Kirby Air Ride. If you're unfamiliar with City Trial, or just Kirby Air Ride in general, the Hydra is a legendary machine, often being considered by many fans of the game to be the best star of City Trial. So much so that some might even consider that under a competitive rule set, it would actually be classified as a banned star. However, this is not the case, and I will be explaining why. It's worth mentioning that since this video is about competitive card, I will only be discussing the Hydra within the confines of the meta. This means any information I present about the Hydra in this video will be only under the consideration of how it is relevant to the competitive gameplay. In City Trial, in order to obtain a Hydra, you must first obtain the 3 pieces of the Hydra that will be randomly obtainable in the city during the course of the game. Some games will make these pieces available, and some will not. This is also true for the Dragoon, but since this video is about the Hydra, I will mainly be focusing on just how it relates to the Hydra. Let's first talk about all the practical reasons why the Hydra is good. Well, not only is it the heaviest machine in the game, it is also the tankiest machine by a huge margin. This means that the Hydra is basically like a real-life tank. It runs into anything with ease and will almost one-hit KO any opponent with a simple press of the A button. It isn't even compensated for either with defense, with it having one of the best base HP stats, making it scale with HP a ridiculous amount. And because weight adds extra defense to a machine, it hardly takes damage from direct attacks either. This would, at least in theory, make it unstoppable in the city if it can catch up to anyone trying to run away from the Hydra. There are some flaws about the Hydra you would have to consider though. The first one is that it can't really glide that well compared to some other machines. And this is particularly true when considering how well it can climb vertically. It can still get some pretty good distances though if you have the right stats for it. But if you get the Hydra and it ends up being a high jump, you're likely not going to get very far compared to a Jetstar or a Wingstar. Under the current competitive rule set though, gliding stadiums are disabled for tournament play, making this facet of the current meta irrelevant. One of the most glaring flaws is that the devs decided that the Hydra needed an enormous amount of charge in order to start moving. And concerning its charge, it introduces another issue with the Hydra which is important to the concept of this video. But if you consider everything that I have mentioned thus far, there are some reasons to think that the Hydra is very, very unbalanced. It is also pretty easy to obtain, not to mention. The 3 pieces are trivial to its value considering they will always be obtainable at roughly the same time, and can only be found in certain places, in which anyone can learn with ease. Under normal circumstances, the Hydra would be legitimately impossible to beat in Destruction Derby, as it is just way too ridiculously strong to even make a decent dent in, let alone get even 1 KO on it without even getting KO'd yourself. And in general, it would have nearly no counter in races. You would have to hope and pray that it ends up being a single race if you're pitted against a Hydra, as well as it having no charge, and you would need also way more speed than it, otherwise it's a done deal. There is a reason, though, why the Hydra is not banned in competitive play. It is due to one glaring oversight of how Kirby Air Ride deals with hit stun. Let's first talk about hit stun. To add weight to attacks, the developers at HAL decided that the vehicles would undergo a hit stun period in any hit. In hit stun, there are 3 things that happen. Since you are completely inactionable in this state, you cannot quick spin, you cannot brake, and crucially, your charge meter freezes from being transferred into a boost.
I'm sorry. Sorry, not sorry.
Ah! Oh
Got
my
it.
god, no, I thought.
Different vehicles will tend to have longer hit stun modifiers. The Slick Star and the Rocket Star are two of the worst, but the Hydra actually has very good hit stun. One of the better hit stun modifiers in the game, as a matter of fact, because of course it does. But what's important to take note of here is how hit stun freezes your charge meter. One major flaw that the Hydra shares with the Bulk Star is how it can only move when you have enough charge to transfer into acceleration to start moving. The Hydra in particular will only move as long as it has enough charge going past the fourth quadrant of the charge meter. More importantly, it's not actually the charge being present that will make the Hydra move, it is the use of the charge that will allow it to move. This is why getting something like the charge lock here is why the Hydra will not move, unlike any other machine which will move when getting the charge lock. Of course, the exception also being the Bulk Star. The charge needs to be decreasing in order for the Hydra to move. And as I stated before, being in hit stun makes your charge meter freeze, no matter what vehicle you're in. So because of the Hydra's reliance on the charge to move, this means that if you hit the Hydra while it is not moving, it will not be able to move until it is out of hit stun. This means that if you could, in theory, repeatedly hit the Hydra, making it impossible to come out of hit stun, this would cause the Hydra to be in a repeated damage state until it completely runs out of HP. And that right there is what we call stun locking. It's worth noting that not only does the charge-based acceleration cause the Hydra to be vulnerable to stun locking, but its weight is also a major cause. Take the Bulk Star for instance, the only other machine in the game that shares this trait with the Hydra. It is a heavy machine, but is not nearly as heavy as the Hydra, and so it is not as vulnerable to stun locking because moves like the Tornado that do damage and knockback at the same time will cause the Bulk Star to be knocked out of stun lock. There is a caveat to this though. Knockback from hits that cause knockback will actually be decreased in severity by the machine's defensive value, making you actually less susceptible to stun locks if you have less defense. But because the weight on the Hydra is so large, making its defense so good, it actually makes it still possible to stun lock even on 0 defense and weight stats. When you are in stun lock, it's actually still possible to move though. You can hold A and inch forward, but in stun lock, the stun lock E, if you will, can also inch forward. This means that basically no matter what you do, you cannot escape stun lock. Kinda. There actually are some ways you can get out of stun lock. It just really involves in how you can make yourself inaccessible. For example, if you inch towards a cliff, you can actually fall off and escape stun lock. This works for pretty much any cliff in the game. You can also escape stun lock in areas that have boost panels, like the ones in Celestial Valley or even the rail that is there as well. You can even sometimes get somebody to bounce themselves out of a stun lock if you bait them towards a wall and cause them to bounce off of it. Okay, so now that I have explained what stun locking is on the Hydra, how does this fit within competitive car? Well, like I implied before, this catastrophic oversight by the developers to allow hit stun to affect charge made it so that the Hydra was susceptible to the stun lock's infinite damage, potentially making it a liability for competitive play. This has made it so that instead of the Hydra being an easy win condition, it actually made it a risk. Hydra's usefulness should not go understated. It is good for easy comebacks and can still function as a viable win condition, but this oversight makes it so that some competitive players ditch the idea of Hydra to avoid the risk of being stun locked. It really is up to the player whether or not sacrificing the Hydra is really worth avoiding the possibility of a stun lock though, because the one-hit KO benefit of the Hydra is extremely useful in some situations. We must talk about the most controversial part about stun locking the Hydra though, and it is how it comes into play with NetPlay's new braking feature in stadiums. If you are unaware, in competitive NetPlay, the community added an additional braking option that makes it so you do not automatically trigger moves that are caused by the A button, such as throwing Gordos. This also includes charging. When braking with B, you will not charge. Since you are still considered in a driving state, this means that you can quick spin while being completely still. In competitive city trial, your condition for winning is by winning the stadium. This means in races, KOing your opponent in a race will count as a win because they cannot finish. Whenever the Hydra spawns into a stadium, it is forced to charge in order to do anything. This means that in races, opponents will have the opportunity to stun lock 100% of the time. This is because of the ability to spin in place. This means that you can spin into the Hydra easily before it can even get up to charge. So you will almost certainly be able to catch a Hydra and stun lock, since spins will never stop if they are hitting something during their strong period. I say opportunity, however, because there is one thing that makes stun locks not guaranteed. In order to be able to catch the Hydra in an infinite stun lock, you are required to have a certain offensive value. This can sometimes be variable depending on the Hydra's defense as well as the machine you're on. A Shadow Star can't true stun lock a Hydra until it has about 4 to 5 offense, but the Compact Star can't do it until it has roughly 6 or 7. This means sometimes you are not vulnerable to quick spinning stun locks if the opponent does not have enough offense.
That's Kinix!
He can't stun lock. Kinix only has 4 offense. Never mind, he can stun lock. No, he can't! See,
No, he can't.
stun lock. Only 4. He's only got 4 offense. That being said, it does make using the Hydra for stadium play almost a guaranteed loss, if not very risky. There are some exceptions with Destruction Derbies, where you may be able to charge in time before your opponent can reach you, but this is really only applicable for Destruction Derby 1 and 2. Otherwise, you have to have a nearly insane stat lead over your opponent in order to avoid getting stun locked in DD3, 4, and 5. But in races, no matter what your stats are, it is a guaranteed stun lock so long as your opponent has around 5 offense or so, which is pretty common considering how easy it is to get that many. Many viewers of competitive car and even some players have brought up this as an issue, as well as it being an utter farce to the game. As how could such an iconic piece of Kirby Air Ride be almost useless in competitive Kirby Air Ride? Although, is it really fair to say that the Hydra is unviable in a competitive landscape? It is definitely unviable to use in stadiums, but you can always just switch machines beforehand. It's not like there are that many that could do that much worse. Some are even better than the Hydra if you don't include stun lock. It's actually very difficult to perform a stun lock in City Trial because it usually requires catching the Hydra in its charging phase. Or you might get lucky enough to hit it and continue to hit it as it slows down. When doing a hit on Hydra while it's in motion, it will take time for it to deaccelerate, making it very difficult to catch in the city. It is insanely risky as a player to go for stun lock in City Trial because one whiff or mistimed spin is almost always punished by a KO and probably a lost game. The stun locking meta, in my opinion, actually creates a more interesting circumstance for when the Hydra is in play. If the Hydra is built, will the opposing player push for a stun lock if they have to in order to secure the win? I think this option makes the games more interesting instead of a decisive one right on the Hydra's construction. Could you imagine how lame it would be if somebody built a Hydra and the opponent just immediately quit? That's probably what would happen if stun locks weren't possible. All in all, I'm just glad there is a way to stop the Hydra from being too much of a meta definer. It would probably suck otherwise.